Okay, so welcome everybody to the I Founded podcast series. Today we are we're joined by a really welcome guest who is very, very far away from Cambridge. Georgie will say hello in a second, but if you're new to this podcast or if it's the first episode you're coming to, this is a real short series for Lent 2021 to essentially inspire journeys into social innovation and entrepreneurship. And this is really about connecting the Cambridge student community with some really impressive social ventures that are out there doing some interesting work out in the world. So we're going to be first, a good thing would be to introduce Georgie Hemmingway, and she can say hello, and she can also explain why we've got a lovely screenshot of her here, which was taken just shortly ago.
Hi, my name's Georgie Hemmingway, and I'm the founder of Footprint Cafes. I'm coming to you live-ish, as it's a podcast, from Thailand, from the island of Koh Phangan. And unfortunately, my laptop's having some technical difficulties at the moment, so I can't actually turn my camera on. But I'm sat in the second Footprint Cafe here on the island of Koh Phangan.
Lovely, thank you so much. And as you can see just from the background there, it's probably going to be the most unusual place we've had somebody interviewed from for this series. So thank you so much for being with us, Georgie. That's the first thing I should say. And
thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, and we're so looking forward to hearing about what you've been doing. So so this is Georgie. She's just introduced herself, and she's the founder of Footprints Café. Now we've included a couple of links for you there. So if you wanted to pause the video and just take a note of those links so that you can go and visit them and find out so much more about the cafe, please do. And you'll see that there's a Lonely Planet video there that I'm going to show clips of as we're talking, all technology helping us along. And I'll also put these links in the description for the video so you can link them easily. But just worth you, Georgie, explaining why Lonely Planet have got a video of you there about some of your achievements.
Yes, we're very lucky this year. Footprint Cafes was nominated by a travel writer to Lonely Planet for best small business. Lonely Planet this year, because it's been such an unusual year, decided to create awards with a focus on businesses, organizations, people and places that are really trying to redefine tourism and have a positive impact with what they're doing and their business models and their sort of their missions. And yeah, we were lucky enough to be nominated for Small Business of the Year, and we're very lucky in that we won it, which has been great. It's been a real boost to a year that has otherwise been quite difficult, sort of rocky road for everyone. So it was a real sort of silver lining for us.
Brilliant. Okay, congratulations on that. And we're going to actually move on a little bit. And what's been a really interesting question to ask people is about what you learned about your business in the last year. So we'll get to that slightly later. And so just to give an overview to everybody that's listening or watching about some of the questions we're going to ask. And shortly I'm going to take these off screen so that we can have a look at the video. But we're going to really cover your whole kind of journey from the start, but also, you know, what you've learned, the characteristics you think it takes, the challenges, and also what you think, you know, those not challenges, but actually how you change just an idea into a functional business. So that's what we're going to have a look at. But before whilst we're doing that, I'm just going to pop this video on whilst we're talking so that as people are listening, they can see that short video.
Oh,
so yeah, you can revisit it as well. So you've talked a little bit about who you are and what you do, but could you just tell us, you obviously just didn't wake up in the middle of a cafe in Thailand, so can you tell us a little bit about your journey to actually becoming a founder?
Yeah, absolutely. To be honest, it was totally by accident. I wasn't planning on funding a social enterprise at all. I was just on holiday in Cambodia, and a series of events which really started, very sadly, it started with a tragedy in 2010, a stampede on a bridge in Phnom Penh. which meant that my sort of 4-day holiday turned into a volunteering, and that volunteering then eventually led to coming up with the idea for Footprint Cafes. But it wasn't deliberate at all. It was very much accidental.
Okay. And what a little bit about your that's kind of focuses on your inspiration and the how you immersed yourself. But I mean, you know, what about when the very kind of basic foundations, which is when you were leaving school or studying? Did you ever what was that journey like from education into your career, into actually thinking, I want to kind of do something on my own?
Right. Yeah. It actually came very, very late in life. My education background is in politics. I studied politics and international relations for my undergraduates, and that is what I went into. I worked in after I finished. After I graduated, I started working in politics in Parliament, which I loved. I really enjoyed it. In 2010, after sort of losing an election, I went on a global sulk. And the idea was to sort of take some time out, because I could, to enjoy life a little bit, and then to really sort of get back into politics and then sort of, you know, more political campaigning and stuff. But then Cambodia happened, and that really changed things and perspective. Before having worked in policy and campaigns, I knew that what I was doing was what I loved, and that it was having a positive impact. But it wasn't very tangible. You couldn't really see it. You could see that maybe policy was changing and getting support, and that was great, but it wasn't like a day-to-day experience of positive impact. After being in Cambodia and starting what was the first cafe, New Leaf Book Cafe, which is based on our model. Maybe we can talk about that a bit later. But sort of after a year of that, I realized that I really enjoyed doing day-to-day things, and even if it was kind of, you know, pretty boring things, they can be when you're doing a business, it can be sort of quite mundane. But being able to see the positive impact it had in a very sort of tangible way really was very rewarding. And I knew after a year of doing it, despite some of its mundaneness, it was something that I wanted to do again and again, and I could see the impact, and it was something that I felt very passionately about. So yeah, and it was actually taking it back to education. It was a sort of a year after this first restaurant, and seeing the daily impact of it. I was listening to a podcast, and it was a Cambridge University podcast. Bonnie Soanes was doing it, and she was talking about a 1-year course on entrepreneurship, and it was that podcast that made me sort of apply to Cambridge. And when I applied to Cambridge and I went to Judge Business School, I had this business model in mind, and so really sort of the experience happened first, and I then followed it up with the education that was needed.
And so what I kind of pick up there is like this compound building of these little, and actually I've used this phrase with another founder, which is these jigsaw pieces that start to accumulate through your career. And then, and you probably don't, think immediately exactly what your business is going to look like, and that you have to try and fail. But you mentioned there kind of career in politics, they're having an impact that but is that kind of as tangible or as visible as enough as you need it? And you start to understand a little bit, don't you, those grey areas that you'd like to be filled a bit.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you also see you have that sort of underlying passion, or you have something that motivates you, but you can also see like that it can be experienced or delivered in different ways, which can be rewarding in different ways. Policy and research was very rewarding. You would look at the bigger picture, and you would have this, lots of data, and you knew that what you were doing was kind of hopefully going to have a big impact, but you also knew you would probably never see that on the ground, because you'd probably move on to the next thing. Or whereas with something like Social Enterprise Cafe, it is so small, but you see how those small little things have an impact on other people's daily life, and you sort of form this community around you, and you feel very privileged to sort of do it. It feels very nice. It's a nice thing to be involved in it. So yeah.
And I think what you've picked up on there, which we can pick up on later, but is actually the measure of the impact, because you just said it's a small thing. You've got your cafe and you have that small impact, but and I think that's really interesting to hear against maybe the perception that to make social or global change, it has to be globally changing, huge, big change, and which probably policy sets out to do, right? Make real substantial change for the mass. But
yes, absolutely.
But you're coming from a perspective which is about every person that you make a change with, every small impact you make is still as valuable.
Absolutely. I think you need both. You absolutely need both. You can't say sort of like having that small impact in daily lives is any more important than the big policy thing, or vice versa. They're both working towards the same end in very different ways, and they both feed into each other, and
hugely important. So having said that, then how would you summarise, if you could, the work of Footprints Café in around 3 words?
This part is easy for us because it's kind of our mission statement. So 3 words: people, planet, profit.
Lovely. And why those 3?
Well, that's our mission is kind of sort of separated into 3 different areas. Otherwise known as like a triple bottom line approach. But it's sort of, so people, that's looking at our team and looking at how we can help them and how we can support them in reaching their goals and their dreams. Planet, that's looking after the environment and doing everything that we can to be as sustainable as possible. And then finally, profit, that's ensuring that all of our profits are not for private profit. They're profits to donate back to the community. They're profit for positive social impact. And so that really is, it's kind of like the 3 areas of our mission.
And we can talk a little bit later about how important having those grounding measures are, those mission statements are, and how they can be useful for anybody, not just founders. But I was curious, really. You talked about studying politics and IR, and obviously that's what you went on to do. But what was your mindset as you were studying and moving towards graduation? Did you ever see yourself as an entrepreneur, or was it just not on the radar yet?
No, for graduation from my undergrad, absolutely not. It wasn't something I considered doing at all. I was very much keen to get involved in politics, and that's where I wanted my career to be, whether it was directly in politics or whether it was sort of an NGO or non-profits. It was very much sort of cause related. I knew that that's what motivated me. But I grew up in a small family business. My parents owned a flower business, a plant shop. And so although I didn't ever think it would be something that I would return to or get involved in again, that sort of small family business and stuff, essentially the cafes are just that. They're kind of like small family businesses. So although quite different to a flower shop, I have essentially gone back into like a very familiar mode, which is, sort of having those very strong relationships with your team and having a strong relationship with the community. It seems.
Sorry.
No, go on.
I was just going to pick up on what that mindset shift is from, having you have the kind of family background, so you've seen entrepreneurs before, you've seen kind of what it takes to run the business, and then you have this political grounding. I think I suppose a little bit more of framework around the complexities of what it takes to set up or understand the needs of an area, right? Would you say your politics and IR background and the subsequent career gave you the kind of insight into some of the complexities about what you might be trying to do?
Definitely, I think so. And then potentially also some of the damages, how something very small can seem like a good thing to do or a good idea at the time. But then if you look at the knock-on effect that has on different areas, that can actually be a negative too. So I think that certainly helped with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so where did that mindset shift come in from? Because being a founder also means, kind of in parentheses, managing people and essentially their livelihoods. You're responsible for so much more than just your idea, aren't you?
Right.
So what motivated that shift from probably you could go and support a another venture
Yep.
to actually wanting to become a founder?
Right. Yes, I would say that was almost entirely by accident. It wasn't a concerted effort on my part. It was going to CM Reap. I was volunteering at a project, and initially the idea was to help them get some income. So myself and another volunteer, Ian Croft, started working and brainstorming on an idea. And the year before, I had spent a lot of time. I'd actually been to New York, and I spent a lot of time in a place called Housing Works Bookshop, which is an amazing place. If anyone's going to New York, please check it out. It's very cool. And it's a secondhand bookshop that is run by volunteers. And so we just came up with this idea to help this project, to create a sort of secondhand bookshop / cafe that could help the project. And really, that just kind of snowballed and got momentum. And then it was like, well, if we're helping this organization, why don't we help lots of organizations? And actually, the problem is much bigger than just, helping this organization. The problem is the tourism in general isn't working for CM Reap. So, and it was kind of, I think if someone had turned around to me at the beginning of the journey and said, right, you're going to start a social enterprise, you're going to start you're going to try and create a chain of cafes that's going to help, well, your aim is to change how tourism works and impacts local communities, I would have been terrified. I would have been like, absolutely no thank you, I do like policy and research. I'm very comfortable there. But it happened gradually, and then just Ian's confidence. Ian came from banking. He'd done a lot of sort of business, and he had a lot of experience in various aspects of that. And then after doing it for a year and seeing it run and seeing the impact, I was like, no, actually, I like this and I can do it. It's scary if you look at it as a solid thing, but if you break it down into little parts, it's really not that scary at all, and it's actually incredibly enjoyable. It's stressful, but it's enjoyable.
Sure.
So yeah, it snuck up on me.
So yeah, it crept up, which is interesting because it feeds a little bit into the next thing I wanted to talk to you about, which was having the idea and recognizing the opportunity is one thing. Yeah. And people listening to this might be recognizing things in their own lives and in their own communities that they can see need change. But how do you actually turn the idea into a functional venture that is actually, at least has a chance of working?
Yeah. For me, I would say one thing is clarity of vision, sort of knowing what you want to do and why you want to do it. I mean, we've spoken about a little bit, like having that story. People know stories. People can identify with stories, and I mean, life is just a series of stories. So sort of knowing what the story is, and knowing maybe even what you want the ending to be, or which direction you want to be heading in. And then also people. It's just nobody can do a lot of these by yourself. It's really not possible to have the skill set, to have the networks, to have just the bandwidth. It's finding the right people to work with, and finding sort of knowing what sort of work culture you want to have, and knowing what sort of skills you need and who has them and where you're going to get them from. And I think so it's vision and people.
And how did you go about making those connections? Because I would imagine for your project specifically, perhaps compared to some of the more UK-based or even Westernized businesses that I've been talking to, how did you go about finding those people that could help you? And I suppose actually the biggest thing is not just about founding, but continue to help you.
Yes, no, absolutely. Well, I think I was very lucky in that the first restaurant was set up in CM Reap. Now, CM Reap has no lack of talent or ambition, and it is a town that's sort of been built around tourism. So it's a town that has had a huge amount of tragedy during the Khmer Rouge and then the years afterwards. And it really was through sort of NGOs and tourism that it started to rebuild itself. So having said that, sort of going to CM Reap and saying, right, we're going to start a book cafe, there was there are many people with skills in the service industry, in like cooking, and because that's kind of what the town's been built around, and there's lots of catering schools and stuff, so that's wonderful. So you've kind of got this abundance of talent and ambition. And then we're very lucky with our model, because our model is about, you know, looking after our team. So hopefully automatically people will kind of want to come and work for you, because that's part of what you're doing. The planet part, our team very much embraced that as soon as we started talking about it and the consequences of certain actions on the planet. And it's really one of the most fulfilling things, is to see your team kind of take on the values that you have. Don't necessarily have to be there to begin with, but over time, when you can sort of say like that, you know, this is a good thing, and these are the reasons why. Or yeah, and then part of the whole thing about Footprint is it's about empowering local communities. So rather than you know, we give our profits away, we give them as grants for the local community on various projects, and it's our cafe, it's the team that decide where those grants go and how best put to use. So not only is our team sort of working for a cafe, it's you know, they're also part of the future of their community. Hopefully it's a very different experience from working in other places, and it's empowering in terms of people's own skill set, but also empowering in terms of defining their future and the future of the community, their community. So I think we've been very lucky with staff retention, and the people that have been attracted to us. And I think a part of that has been the business model itself. We also have an astounding manager, Peg Day, who like he runs a show. He's so skilled in terms of creativity, in terms of people management, in terms of so many things. I think that has been for us one of, you know, it's an amazing sort of asset to have, to put it in sort of cold terms. But I think if you've got good people around you, it tends to self-perpetuate. You tend to get good people coming. So
yeah, and keeping those relationships is about interpersonal skill, which is so important, and something that people can actually build whilst they're at university and expose themselves to those opportunities, which I think is really important.
Absolutely, yeah. Our trustees and our sort of our financial support came entirely from being at Cambridge at Judge Business School, and sort of networks, and actually people's kindness and word of mouth. And Footprint happened because of networks and people skills, without a doubt. Like,
great. Oh yeah, that's a lovely summary. Because I think so many things are about network, but that takes real time and hard work. But you just touched on, just finally, your master's program. And actually, I get asked, not just the judge, you must say that. I know we're at Cambridge, but I often get asked, is it worth doing a master's in entrepreneurship, or is it worth, you know, kind of going to learn entrepreneurship? And I just wonder what your perspective was on that, in terms of what kind of any functional gains you got from it when, you know, maybe you already had the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's definitely beneficial. As I said, without doubt, I don't think Footprint will be happening without it. But it wasn't necessarily sort of opening up a textbook and doing an exam or working through problems that was really sort of the benefit. I mean, of course, that was a benefit, and it was very useful. But I think you can buy a textbook kind of anywhere, and there are lots of things that you can sort of learn online. And the real sort of tangible, I think, benefit were the networks and the people. And for me personally, it was having these amazing speakers come in, who had done amazing things with their lives, and they had businesses, and hearing the mistakes that they had made, or the, you know, failures in their lives, and it was wonderful, because it kind of gave you permission to try and fail. And I don't think I can sort of emphasize enough how important that was. You kind of made you stop being scared of the F word. It was kind of like, okay. And then amongst that also, I think being around other people who are trying to create something, and seeing their passion. Might not be the same passion as you, or even in the same, same field or same area, but just seeing somebody else who was passionate and who wanted to create something. It's very different to going into work every day and you've got a role, or you're given a goal at the end of the day, but you're kind of creating the goal, creating the role, redefining everything, and it can be quite scary, and it often lacks direction, and but having other people who are doing the same thing around you kind of gives you comfort, and then also having met people who have done fantastic things, and seeing that them sort of saying, oh well, when I first started I did this, and it really shows you that it's not a straight line, it's a journey, it's constantly kind of reinventing itself and reflecting and then trying again.
Yeah, I think that's so important what you've just said, particularly maybe to the audience that are listening, which is that the permission to fail, that there are no magic kind of journeys that are not perfect, and that actually sometimes you just need a little bit of emboldenment from seeing other people. And I would encourage, particularly during the pandemic, where actually probably access to talks and things that you can go to that you wouldn't have been able to go to because you had to travel maybe. That's great to hear these stories, and actually partially why I invited you today, Georgie, as we talked about before of this, which is you're passing that on now, yourself, and
thank you.
Allowing people to listen to you. So I think learning from others, particularly at the moment, is really key, and actually brings us beautifully on to the final 5 questions we have, which really talk about some of the challenges, and talk about learning and, kind of reflection. And I think that's important, kind of the second half. And actually, you just mentioned it, but the first question that I have kind of raised here is just how important failure is in the founder journey. So how important has failure been to you?
I really do think that it's key, and key is not necessarily if failure happens or not, because it may or may not happen. I mean, it probably is going to happen, but it may not. But it's about your mindset when it does happen. And I actually saw I saw an Oscar Wilde quote today, and I was just like, oh, that is that is it. And it just says he says, like, experience is the hardest teacher. It gives you the test first and the lesson after. And I think that is exactly how you need to see failure. I mean, if you treat failure as the end in itself, it will be. But if you treat it as a lesson, it will be that. So, I mean, are you going to is failure going to be the outcome, or is it just going to be a lesson? So I think it's really important to reflect, think how you could do things differently. I think also, it's important to be sort of hard in your analysis, of course, because you want to learn from mistakes, but also to be gentle to yourself, because it can feel horrible at the time, and often when it's your own venture, you can take things quite personally, or it becomes part of your identity, and it can be quite hard when things go wrong. But you can always learn. And I mean, learning from failure doesn't mean that you always stick with something. You stick with something until failure. I mean, the lesson from failure can also mean that this is the right time to walk away, or this is. But you can always learn something from events, and you can use it for the next venture, or the next idea, or the next phase or chapter in your life. I think it's very good to find that balance.
It's so key for anything, but particularly career-wise, which is the it's impossible to know exactly whether something's right for you, you're doing the right thing.
Right.
You can make an informed decision.
Yeah.
Because you've done your research, you've spoken to people. There's actually another founder said to us on this podcast that there's plenty of frameworks that you can follow to test out your idea.
Yeah.
but it's about the learning. And you've just said it again there, which is, as long as you're always learning, and then you can't really go wrong as long as you act upon that learning. If you kind of just keep repeating the same thing,
right?
It's not going to help.
Yeah.
So I think that's really valuable what you said there about the learning, and it just means moving on. Sometimes it's not necessarily kind of failure. It's just you've learned that it's not right now.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So having kind of talked about that research piece and the learning, often people, students, postdocs, PhDs, whoever in the Cambridge community, they want to be involved in organisations that do good. They want to have a career in impact and social innovation, but they want to get some experience to see what that life is really like. And obviously, by the nature of the organisation, sometimes that can be quite difficult.
Yes.
So what advice could you give to somebody who was looking to see if this kind of career lifestyle was right for them?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would say just being a presence can add value. You don't have to know it all, or even a bit, but just by being willing to be there, by being willing to learn and to allow that organization to be your focus for a while, you're saying to that person or that organization, I think what you're doing is valuable, and I want to give you my time and focus to help you. And I think some of the sort of best volunteers and people are people who sort of go in with an open mind, and are they're quite humble. They're there to like give whatever the organization feels. It could be something fantastically complicated if that person has that skill set, or it could be something really, really simple. But it's that kind of that willingness to help out and that willingness to support the organization, which really kind of adds value. We had a volunteer once. She was this amazing accountant. She was brilliant at what she did, and she was a great volunteer. But she was great not only because of her skill set, which was wonderful, but it was also just her open-mindedness and her sort of humbleness and her willingness to work with the team in any sort of context. And she sort of arrived with these amazing skills, but she didn't arrive being like, I'm brilliant, I'm amazing, you need me. She arrived with this kind of, how can I help? Like, does this? And it was just, we've had many wonderful volunteers, but I just remember her as being this exceptional volunteer because she had the skills, but she also had the right mindset of sort of growth and helping in any way that she could. So I think just by saying that you want to volunteer or you want to support an organization, you're already sort of adding value.
Is it, would it be, if someone was going to approach you, for example, is it valuable to make it clear what you can add? So like you said, that lady was an accountant, but just kind of knowing what your skill set is enough to bring to an organisation, particularly if they're small and they might not essentially have lots of time to look after somebody, kind of showing that you've researched kind of the organisation enough to know how they work and how they might be able to add value is a good way to approach a founder to get some experience.
Definitely. That without doubt, that definitely helps. But I also think like having an openness to how the organization. So if you approach an organization and you say, I've got this skill set and this could help, then of course that's wonderful, and that that could be a sort of brilliant way of adding value. However, maybe you approach an organization and the skill set that you have isn't quite what they need or what they want, but by being open to like other ideas or giving time and dedication, when approaching an organization, I think it's good to have flexibility of thinking and knowing your own skills and what you can do to help, but then also listening to what it is that they need and seeing if that is something that you can support. When the two align, your skill set and what they need, that is wonderful. But maybe it's also something not quite within your skill set, and it's just time and passion, or maybe it's a different perspective, or being open to the things that you can add, I think also helps.
Great, good advice. So I think the kind of key pillars are understanding the organisation, seeing the gaps, being creative, and but just having something to offer rather than just asking for experience. I think it's less effective when somebody says, I'd like you to teach me, or I would like to experience, or what they will get out of the experience.
Right, no, absolutely. Yeah. No, having exactly. having a skill to give, having something to give, but also being open to, it's not having a skill to give is not the same as necessarily sort of defining what your role is or what you can do for the organization always. Yeah.
Great. That's a good kind of way of phrasing that. So what drives a lot of people to wanting to work in social innovation or social ventures, social entrepreneurship, impact? I think probably there's been a great focus on this type of business over the last kind of 24 months. And sometimes it can perhaps come across a little bit polished and not glamorous, but maybe it's not always completely representative of just kind of how complex it can be. So what do you think firstly, do you agree with that? And secondly, what do you think the biggest misconceptions of actually being a founder in a social innovation are?
It's a very good question. I don't know. To be honest, I really don't know how people perceive founders of social innovation or social enterprises. I think it's a fairly new field, and people are just sort of learning about it. But I do think that social innovation and the charitable sector unfortunately suffer from the same problem, and that is, unlike ordinary business, they can't be anything other than be seen to be anything other than perfect, which is just, it's not true. And I think both the charity sector and the social innovation sector need to break free of this. And I think maybe that has to come from within. People give ordinary business, such leeway in terms of innovating slowly and making mistakes, and social innovation has to grab that too and say, we have to be allowed to make mistakes. We can't be perfect. I remember when there's a small organization in Cambodia called Pepi, and they're amazing. They're amazing for many, many things. That could be a whole separate podcast. But one of the things that I really admired them for was a few years ago, they wrote a report, and the report was what we did wrong this year. And they just they wrote, no charity does it. Every charity writes we achieved this, we did this, we were marvelous, and Pepi, the small organization that relies on funding, that relies on impressing their funders, wrote this report. This is what we did wrong this year. And it was brilliant. And it was brave, and it breaks a stigma, and because everyone wants to sort of give money to charity. Isn't this charity perfect? Isn't it, it's doing a wonderful thing. Charities are run by humans. Human makes mistakes. Sometimes you can't anticipate what your impact is going to be. You think you're doing something good, and it turns out actually that didn't work out the way we were planning. So yes, I think social innovation and charity needs to help break free of this idea that it can't make mistakes, because it does, and it can learn from them, but it can only learn from them if it's recognized and reflected upon and then tried again.
Yeah, well said. I think actually one of the things I was thinking about in preparing this and what the challenges might be, which is I think everybody, people who are kind of observing the sector have this view of, are you being good enough, and are you doing it in the way people want you to be good enough? People can easily focus on the things that you're not doing well. Another founder said, well, running a social innovation is like running any other business, but you have another thing to think about, which is whatever your mission is, sustainability, other target measures, etc. So interesting that you say about that, you're trying to do good, whatever that means, but you are still definitely humans, and you have to be open and honest about the fact that things aren't going to be as good as you hope all the time.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And probably that you don't, running a cafe doesn't mean that you're sat, with your laptop in your cafe all the time, having chats with people. You're probably working quite hard as well.
Terrifyingly, for this one, I'm actually in the kitchen, which was definitely not something I ever intended to do. But yeah.
So you probably wear many hats.
Yeah, Yeah, definitely. Well, I think most founders do, for sure.
Yeah,
It's part of the job.
absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so final two questions, and this is my penultimate one, which is, it's been a really obviously humanitarian crisis wise, with the pandemic, it's affected everybody in so many complex ways, but probably very interesting for those businesses that are trying to respond to difficulty in some senses, and perhaps social innovations, or just even social ventures, and other small startups are perhaps a little bit more agile or able to respond in ways that very large businesses can't. But every business would have had their challenge. So what have you learnt from the last 12 months about your venture that you didn't know before?
Yeah. I can't say is that our team are amazing, because I definitely did know that before. But like how amazing and resilient they are really did sort of has shown itself this year. Actually, the thing that I would say I've really learned in the last year, and it's quite personal and it's quite small, but I really do think it's for me at least, it was a huge realization. It was very important. And that was the importance of activities in your life that aren't related to your venture. Just having something in your life, however small it might be, hobby, family, whatever, and the net positive effect that has on your adventure. Because this year has seen a need for us to really sort of think outside the box and adapt and prioritize things we never thought we were going to have to prioritize. And often the solutions or new ideas came when doing things totally unrelated, whether that was going for a walk or playing music or reading a book, or sort of just during lockdown, sort of the need to just slow down and do something totally different really has helped with new ideas, new creativities, and just coming up with solutions. And that's totally when not thinking about it. So yeah, that was an interesting realization this year.
Yeah, that perspective.
Right. Yeah.
And did you learn anything about whether is your business more agile than you thought it was? Is it able to change in ways you didn't think? Did you find that it was more needed than ever, or was there anything particularly that came out about your business that you didn't expect over and above the way you can deal with how it functions?
Yeah, I think essentially the essential value of our business really came to the fore, because it's a cafe, so you can value it in terms of your food. It's a book cafe, so your product books as well, coffee, but that isn't really the value of the cafe. The value of the cafe is the catalyst it provides for community and the sense of belonging and ideas. And yes, it was very interesting to sort of realize that your product wasn't necessarily your pancakes and your coffee, and your product was the atmosphere. Your product was the home that it provided that it provides for people and our team. So it was interesting having to adapt the model, knowing that we couldn't provide that space safely, so we had to create something else. And so I don't know, just really silly things like when we were in lockdown and we couldn't actually have the cafe space, we would do things like we'd go onto the local the Facebook group, which is the community Facebook group, and we would run like competitions, like silly wordplay games or photos, and it was creating that sense of community online as a cafe, because we couldn't create it in a physical space. And it had a very positive effect, and it was fun, and it did sort of keep us sane a little bit through lockdown, which was nice. But yeah,
I think so important that we're all starting to think about not the function of our spaces, but what their meaning is in our lives and our communities.
Yes.
And I think that's really interesting for a business like yours, which, like you say, of course, functionally it sells great food and drink.
Yeah.
But it's also about the people that it represents and brings together. in a unique way. So that's very interesting. And hopefully, you know, globally, I mean, you're in Thailand, but everywhere we will value our communities a lot more.
Yes, I hope so. Yeah. And hugs a lot more too.
Yeah, hugs. Yeah. And you know what? Just actually really good coffee and pancakes when you're not terrified of being, you know, terrified of being anywhere near others would be, you know, just so lovely, and that recognition of the small things.
Yes, absolutely. I think we're not going to take many things for granted once this is all over. Just really appreciate the small things for sure.
So final question then, thinking back to, you know, you're sat as perspective in your cafe now, we can hear the traffic, we can, you know, we can feel where you are, you're here running a business and talking about it. But if you had to say something to that person when you were studying that you didn't know then, but you do know now, and you would want to say to that person, what would it be?
Yeah. So this is a really interesting one. One of the things that we learned at business school was to, you know, not be threatened by people that are better than you or more skilled than you in something. You know, in fact, you want those people around you, because if they're doing it better, that's great. You need that. And I never had a problem with that. I was all for it, especially because most people are more skilled at things than me. So I was like, great, you just need to be the person that gathered these people. That's wonderful. Great, I can do that. But I will say this year has definitely taught me, because as I mentioned before, Pek Day, our manager and CM Reap, is so wonderful. He's brilliant at training people. He's brilliant at human resources. He's so good at everything. And the plan for the second cafe in Thailand was really, you know, find location, do a business plan, get Pek Day over, you know, because he's just so good. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. And now I was like, oh no, I have to kind of try and be Pek Day for a little bit. So the key takeaway I would say is, yes, absolutely surround yourself with people that are better than you and more skilled than you, and admire them. But if you can, try and learn and get a little bit of their skills, because one day you might have to be them in a different context. So really just, you know, learn from the people around you and learn from the people that you admire. You're probably never going to be as good as them at different things, but, you know, there's a reason why you admire them. There's a reason why they're so good at their job. Just maybe, you know, try and see what it is and try to somehow copy it and emulate it in a different context, so you can be them to another.
That's really, really, really great advice, Georgie, because I think, you just sometimes have to make it work for a little while, and everybody you meet can help you. So it's not about being an expert, it's just about being able to manage sometimes. I think that's really good advice. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And definitely not being intimidated by people that you perceive to be smarter, better.
No, they can be the greatest teachers. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, you know, and you're there for a reason too, you know, like you said, well, is it my kind of thing to bring these people together? But yeah, maybe it is, you know, and that kind of great network or kind of fusion between people is just as important. So your value is still your value, even if it isn't what you perceive as a kind of another person's value. And I think that's key.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Whether you want to be an entrepreneur or not. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's all of the questions that I had for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think you've shared some really poignant advice for people hoping to be entrepreneurs. Did you have anything you wanted to finally share?
No, I would say if you have an idea and it seems scary, and you just take the first step. I mean, one of the things I've sort of enjoyed during lockdown has been sort of getting to play music again, playing the saxophone again, and one of the best pieces of advice I've learned from playing an instrument, I would say, is the same piece of advice I would give to any would-be entrepreneur. So for the musicians, it was like, okay, practicing can be really boring, or doing a piece can be really boring. Don't set yourself the challenge of, you know, practice, a whole practice, set yourself the challenge of just picking up the instrument each day. Just pick up the instrument and see where it leads. And I would say the same thing for like a big idea or for going on an entrepreneurial journey. Don't imagine doing the whole thing. Just imagine doing a small step and see how that feels. And then try and do the next step after that.
Great. Yeah, just showing up every day to try is important, isn't it? Giving it a go. Yeah,
absolutely.
Great advice. Thank you, Georgie. That's so helpful. And so if anybody wants to go and visit those links that we showed at the beginning of the podcast, you can go and visit. I showed the website as well a little bit while we were chatting so people could see that. But the website, the Lonely Planet video, and, finding out more about what you do is brilliant. And we... so grateful for your time, Georgie, and I think you definitely would have inspired some people out there. We stay safe as well during this time.
Thank you very much.
And lovely to chat to you, and we'll catch up again soon.
Brilliant. Thanks. Bye.